As a couples therapist, one of the most dangerous habits I see in couples in therapy is something that I call management by exception. And that's why in today's video, I wanted to talk about what this concept is and how you can avoid it in your own relationship. Let's dive in. I'm Cameron. I'm a licensed therapist, wife, and mother, and this is my channel, Modern Marriage, where I share with you guys all the tips, resources, and insights that I've gathered from working with couples in therapy so that you can start building the relationship that you've always wanted. So management by exception is a business term that I learned from my dad growing up, and ever since becoming a therapist, I have found it really funny how much this concept shows up in our marriages and home lives. In the professional world, management by exception refers to a leadership style in which managers only get involved in their employees' work when something is going wrong. So in other words, as long as an employee is doing their job well, they won't have to worry about their boss poking his nose into their business. So while this approach has its merits in the workplace, it is far less effective in marriage, since management by exception with our spouse means you only point things out to your spouse when he's messing up. In other words, you end up being far more likely to punish your spouse's poor behavior, like an eye roll or forgetting to do something you asked, than you are to point out and thank your spouse for good behavior, such as doing your laundry or taking out the trash. This isn't often a conscious choice, though. In fact, our brains are primed for this sort of management style in life and in our relationships. We notice the bad far more easily and quickly than we do the good, and the bad sticks with us longer. Unfortunately, though, this tends to leave both spouses feeling underappreciated and overly criticized, which is a really dangerous combination that leads to burnout and resentment in a lot of marriages. So now that you know what managing by exception means, let's talk about how to combat it in your own relationship. But before we move on, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and send this video to someone who you think might find it useful. It turns out that the antidote to managing by exception in marriage is actually quite simple. Find as many excuses as possible to appreciate your spouse for doing good things. In other words, make a conscious effort to notice and then point out the good things your spouse does or says, or the attributes that you love about your spouse. I like to think about it like trying to catch your spouse with his hand in the cookie jar, but if the cookie jar were doing something good rather than something bad. Can you make a game of finding all the good things about your spouse that you're thankful for? This includes things that your spouse does regularly or that may seem like just part of her job. For example, as long as he's home from work on time, my husband is in charge of bedtime with the kids. And even though that's one of the things that we agreed to a while ago, I still try to thank him for the effort. After all, he could just as easily refuse to do it on any given night. He's still doing me a favor, even if it's a favor we decided that he'd do without me asking him. Similarly, he thanks me every time I cook dinner, even though that's one favor we agreed that I'd take care of, since he works far more hours outside of the house than I do. As a relationship progresses, it becomes increasingly easy to take each other for granted because much of what we do for our spouses takes effort to notice. That's why it takes even more effort to build the habit of gratitude for the goodness in each other. But the effort, I promise, is well worth it, since it turns out that this attitude of gratitude has a doubly positive effect. First, your spouse ends up feeling more loved and appreciated, and second, you end up feeling like you've hit the jackpot in marrying your stud of a partner. Why? Simple. The more you choose to pay attention to something, the more your brain will start to notice that thing on its own. In other words, the more effort you spend focusing on all the good things your spouse does for you, the more you'll begin to notice those things without trying, and the more positively you'll start to feel about your spouse. And for the couples who really commit to cultivating more appreciation in their marriages, the results are incredible. They fight less, they have more sex, and they're just generally a lot happier to be together. Before finishing this video though, I do want to mention one piece of pushback that I hear a lot from couples in therapy when I bring up this topic. And it often sounds something like this. But why should I thank him for doing what he's supposed to do? That's part of his job, and I do my job without expecting praise in return. Of course, like any compelling argument that's also a bit flawed, there is a kernel of truth here. In an ideal world, we would all be doing what we're supposed to do and need no positive reinforcement to do it. We would all know the right thing, and we would just do it without being asked. I'd argue, though, that this same ideal world would also be full of a lot of praise, even if it wasn't needed. As one of the jobs of a spouse is to make each other feel loved, appreciated, and noticed. However, even in the real world, it turns out that showing appreciation may be the most effective way, literally the most effective way, to encourage positive behavior in your spouse. Behavioral psychologists figured this out decades ago. Positive reinforcement works far better to encourage the good in someone to emerge than punishment is ever able to. And it makes sense if you think about it. Punishment involves reacting to negative behavior. If it works, best case scenario, you just see less of the negative behavior, not necessarily more of the positive behavior. But expressing gratitude as much as possible each time your spouse does something good focuses both of your attention on the good, making it much more likely for that good to keep happening. Okay, guys, what did you think? Does this align with your experiences in relationships and marriage? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Cameron, and this is Modern Marriage.